This is an AI-narrated version of an article from my website, Natural Constipation Solutions. Thank you to Jonah's mom for sharing her son's story and writing this guest post. She requested that I publish their story anonymously for her son's privacy. Jonah's Miralax Restoralax story. By 24 months my son Jonah was still on formula, and while he was eating a wide variety of fruits and veggies, they were all strained stage 1 baby food. He had just started with small pieces of toast and Cheerios. When I tried to introduce the next stage in baby food, or what my husband and I were eating, either just finger size or strained, he gagged and threw up anything he had eaten. So I just kept going back to the strained baby foods. I think it's important to note that Jonah was born almost 8 weeks early, and while he was hitting most milestones at his real age versus his corrected age, he was definitely just not able to swallow many textures of food. At his baby 24-month checkup, his pediatrician was determined that I had to stop the baby food. He will not starve himself. Well, that wasn't true. And yes, a child who physically can't swallow certain foods will become ill. The same pediatrician also said to stop the formula he had been thriving on and start him on cow's milk. I followed both recommendations, even though all my motherly instincts screamed not to do either. 2 weeks later, my son was severely constipated in the hospital and being given his first adult dose of Restoralax. Restoralax is the same product as Miralax, with the same ingredient polyethylene glycol, just sold under a different name, called Miralax in the United States. We live in Canada. That was the start of our 5-year battle. Update. There have been over 36,000 reports of adverse events related to PEG 3,350 laxatives to the FDA. This video has more information. Withholding begins. My son ended up having a couple of very large and very painful stools. After that he withheld. For the next 2.5 years he did not make one bowel movement by himself. I manually manipulated the stool out of him every day so he wouldn't get backed up. Some days it was 2 hours of sitting and rocking his legs back and forth and singing songs as we both cried and mentally and physically became exhausted. When he was 4.5 one day he just went on his own. He was still in diapers. We hadn't even thought about toilet training. I was just so thrilled that he was finally going on his own. Toilet training wasn't even on my radar, and his doctor had suggested we hold off due to his constipation problems. It was a huge relief to finally just have him making a bowel movement on his own. That was a great day. During that whole time, he was on Restoralax. I gave it to him daily, 2 teaspoons a day, until I saw a mum in my local Facebook mum group post something about Restoralax and that it could be dangerous. I started to Google frantically with dread and a sick feeling in my stomach. Then I found Wendy's Natural Constipation Solutions Facebook group and asked to join. Then my whole world fell apart as I came to the horrific realization that I had slowly poisoned my own child, this precious being that I grew in my body, that I would die for. I had been feeding him toxic garbage that had damaged his neurological system, and now we live with the new knowledge that he was on the autism spectrum. After I cried an entire night, I began to reach out in this group and others. I began to share my story and several amazing, kind and generous mothers responded. Wendy was the first amazing mama who truly helped save my sanity. She helped me to understand a few things that I try to pass on to all new parents starting this new phase in your life. What did I do? My son was on Restoralax for almost 5 years. The moment I realized how dreadful and dangerous it is, I knew he would never ever have one more dose. I stopped cold turkey. Now, some of those words of wisdom I heard from women like Wendy, who have been where I was. First, we can only do better when we know better. Second, I use the airplane analogy. We must put our own mask on first before we can help our child. Third, I had to lay down my guilt as it was consuming me, and my rage, and my anger against the makers of this poison, and every doctor out there who is pushing it. I had to set that all aside, and lastly, fourth, get busy trying to heal my son, devise a plan. Many people suggested seeking out a functional doctor or a naturopathic doctor, I found an amazing ND who we saw within the first 2 weeks of being off Restoralax. She helped to put together a cohesive plan, or protocol that helped work on dealing with the constipation as well as beginning the healing journey. My son Jonah at age 7 on Restoralax was a picky eater. Since the age of 2, he has not eaten fruit, vegetables, meat, nothing except bread, toast, peanut butter, ice cream, yogurt, chips, goldfish crackers, and chocolate cake snacks. That was his entire diet for almost 5 years. 14 months later, Jonah is Restoralax free, no supplements of any kind, for constipation, now has a strict gluten-free and mostly dairy-free diet and has a slightly broader diet. Jonah now has a bowel movement 2 to 4 times a day, which his ND says is a good goal for children his age. So, how did we get here? I devised that plan I talked about. I call it our protocol, and I did it with the help of amazing other parents who have walked this path before me, as well as a very educated, compassionated and dedicated ND, whom we continue to see. The following is what I did, and what the results were, are from getting my son off of Miralax. Note: I share our experience to help other parents as so many helped me, but I would be remiss if I did not say that after over a year of reading thousands of posts by parents, just like me, there is no one single magic cure, or one plan that will work for every child, or adult. There are however many remedies that do however seem to work very well for many children, and thus, we share in hopes that parents can, as I did, develop a protocol that works for your child. One final thought, before I go into exactly how I handled the diet and protocol. This is truly an observation from reading thousands of posts and comments in various groups about childhood constipation. It often takes much more to help our kiddos to begin to have healthier bowel movements than we might imagine it would take. I often read parents say, they have tried everything, but when we dig deeper, they may have tried one thing, then another, then another. I believe, from working through this with my own son for the past 14 months, and again, reading so many posts all over the internet, that for many children it will take several things, what I refer to as the protocol, to truly help them on their way to becoming stool-healthy kiddos. Diet. So, as it turns out, it is possible to remove gluten and dairy, even from the pickiest of eaters. Food therapy, will my kid ever eat anything other than gluten and dairy products? So, as I mentioned, my son barely ate anything but things that were either gluten or dairy. In fact, every single thing he ate fell into those two categories. His eating issues were so severe we did food therapy with his occupational therapist. He was the only child, she said, that in 8 weeks, she could not get to try even one new food. No way. When she tried to hop a strawberry up his arm, he kicked so hard he fell off his chair and ran screaming to the next room. Food was a serious issue with him. So, a wonderful educated mama, Wendy, who walked this walk before me said to me, just keep offering new things. She and his ND explained to me that the chemical in Restoralax does something that makes it extremely difficult for kids to even want to try new foods. It affects them, medically. There is an explanation which sort of escapes me as I write this in the middle of the night, but suffice to say they were correct. They both told me, wait and watch. The longer he is off Restoralax and the longer he was on good probiotics, putting the good stuff back into his gut, he will, naturally, want to try new foods. I didn't believe them, to be honest. But, I did what they said. I had a protocol in place that was helping with the constipation, and I kept asking if he wanted to smell new foods. One day, last August, his dad had ordered a pizza. We hadn't had that in the house in a year as I found out I'm diabetic and I was on a strict diet. So, his dad had a pizza this one night. My son walks up to him, takes a slice and says, I love pizza, and proceeded to eat 3 pieces, complete with pepperoni, mushrooms, green peppers and bacon. I almost fell off the bed. Yup, we were eating in bed that night and that was the beginning of so many amazing changes. I knew then that I had to find a new gluten-free bread that I could sub out for his regular bread. I tried about 10 different kinds before I found one that he liked, and that was it. I took everything else away, got it out of the house. No more fish crackers, no more snack cakes. I also pulled all dairy. He was a big milk drinker, he was still drinking 3 cups of milk a day, 1 before bed for soothing, and I just pulled it all. No yogurt, no more Costco swirl cones, which were his absolute favorite. Nothing. This one very wonderful, and smart, Mum said to me, Mama, even if he eats nothing but that GF bread and peanut butter for the rest of the summer, he won't starve, and the longer he's off gluten, you will be blown away what happens. He will again, just like being off Restoralax, he naturally began to show an interest in new foods. I came to find out that gluten apparently does some weird stuff to their brains. Again, I can't get all the real medical lingo out of my brain. Sorry, it's almost morning as I type this, but I am determined I am going to get our story out. But I want to get this out to all of you so you can hopefully make your choice to move forward. So gluten is nasty. Nasty, nasty for many kids, and no, my son is not celiac. But many children cannot tolerate the high glutinous diet they are consuming. Not just because it causes constipation, which come to find out is indeed my son's root cause, I determined through food tracking, and he is also highly intolerant to some dairy. Ice cream and yogurt are the worst, so after he was gluten-free for a couple months, he started to eat even more new foods. He's still got a pretty limited diet, but now he will smell and lick almost anything I offer. That is huge. Remember the strawberry hopping story? So, here's what I did, his protocol. 1. Probiotics. His were prescribed by his ND. I highly recommend trying to get in to see either an ND or a functional doctor who can complete some testing to determine how exactly the Restoralax has injured your child, and then chart a healing path forward. The testing we did in our ND's office was a hair test that helps to identify high levels of heavy metals, and a live blood cell analysis. This helps to determine if there are issues with a slow immune, yeast overgrowth, parasites, worms, etc., and many other things. I really like this test as it just requires a finger prick for a blood smear, which for a kiddo on the spectrum is far less traumatic than a full blood draw. As I mentioned, we live in Canada. This test was about $200 Canadian, hair test was about $150 Canadian. The ND appointments run about $140 per session. My husband and I have some coverage for these services with our medical benefits with our employer. I suggest looking into this if you have medical benefits with an employer. They can also be claimed on your income tax in Canada. 2. Magnesium citrate. This is used widely in the naturopathic world, and was also the suggestion of the ND. I used the adult version of Natural Calm. Again, due to my son's limited diet, he only drinks water, I had to develop a ratio that was totally undetectable. I dissolved 1/4 teaspoon of the Calm into 1/4 c. boiling water. Let cool, then add to a water bottle that holds a total of 12 ounces or 1.5 cups. In this dilution the Calm is undetectable. The powder will fizz up when it hits the boiling water. Let it completely stop fizzing before cooling down. My son was 7 when we started this, he weighed 50 pounds, he needed 5 to 8 of those water bottles a day. In order to keep his water intake up, I offered salty snacks, such as gluten-free chips. 3. Epsom salt baths. Daily. Add 1/2 cup of Epsom salts in bathtub, water up to belly button, 20 minutes maximum. A quick rinse of the shower is advised as the salts draw toxins from the body which then lay on our skin, so a quick rinse shower after helps to not have itchy skin. Be sure to not go over the 20-minute maximum. Also, just as a note, anyone who has diabetes, high blood pressure, or heart conditions should not use Epsom salts without consulting their doctor. Lastly, I always give my son a water bottle in the bath and he drinks that while he's in there. The salts can cause dehydration, especially in the hot summer months. It's good to err on the side of caution and have them drink water while in the tub. Do this daily until your child is going easily on their own a few times a day. You can then incorporate one a week as a maintenance plan for castor oil tummy messages. Apply about 1 tablespoon of castor oil into the palm of your hands. I often add a bit of organic coconut oil as it makes the castor oil a little less sticky, is an excellent carrier oil. Massage into belly clockwise around belly button, 3 times a day if possible. Same as the Epsom salt baths, once your child is going well on their own, or loose bowels begin, start to drop this back. 5. Exercise. I have found that there are 2 exercises which are excellent natural bowel simulators, biking and jumping. We did this 3 times a day in the beginning. I made a schedule and we really stuck to it. His jumping in the beginning was just jumping jacks or jumping to music etc. We later incorporated and learned new jumping exercises from YouTube videos. We also do kids yoga before bed, also a great bowel stimulator. A great source for kids yoga demonstration is a card game called Yogarilla. It's pricey but kids love it. If your child doesn't have a bike or place to ride during inclement weather, you can achieve the same leg action by them lay on their back, hands under small of the back for support, and cycle legs in the air. 6. Poop chocolates. Very easy to make. I started with 4 chocolates a day. I made them using mini muffin tins lined with papers, filled 3/4 full. As with the other parts of my son's daily protocol, I started to back off of these as his bowels became more and more frequent. Today we use them as part of our maintenance plan. He has 1 or 2 every few days. Note: unrefined organic coconut oil undoubtedly has more health benefits. However, it does have a distinctive taste. For kiddos that are super tasters or picky eaters, I suggest go directly with the refined coconut oil. 7. Lastly, removing all gluten and dairy. I am not kidding, I feared this. I didn't think I had it in me to do it. My son was still having a sippy cup of milk before bed to soothe. I really and truly thought I was taking something so special and meaningful away from him. Many tears were shed over this. I was raised drinking milk, my sister was, all my nieces and nephews, my husband still would drink a gallon a day if it were not so high in calories. How could I come to terms with removing such a huge component from my son's diet? Also, I grew up on a large farm. Dairy was a huge part of my life. But, again, not to sound like a broken record, Wendy was the steady and constant voice of reason and encouragement. Finally, after my son's pizza escapade and I saw that he was in fact open and accepting to new foods and tastes, I knew I just needed to do it. I didn't remove gluten and dairy until about 4 months of doing all of the above, and doing it all religiously. Around the 4.5-month mark is when he had the pizza-thon, and I removed the gluten and dairy. So, if you are feeling like you can't just do all the things at once, I suggest starting all the things listed above, before the last step removing gluten and dairy, and just begin to steadily offer, but nonchalantly to smell, any food you are eating. The important thing here is to just keep asking and offering new foods. The longer your child is off of Restoralax, you will be amazed by the changes you will begin to see. After I removed gluten and dairy, we also stopped the natural calm. There is some debate around how long someone can or should take this. Our ND was okay with around 4 to 5 months then. If my son had required more magnesium, she was going to have some compounded for him, but by the 4.5 months mark he was going easily 2-4 times a day, so we just stopped the magnesium altogether. Getting to the root of the problem. Food tracking. Once I felt my son's bowel movements was stabilized, going easily 2 to 4 times a day, which is what his ND says is a good goal for his age, I then reintroduced 1 food item from gluten, waited to see what happened, watched for bowel movements, signs of gas, bloating etc. He was fully constipated by the 2nd day. I didn't let it go more than 48 hours and used Calm to get his bowels moving again and pass what was now black hard stool, which he hadn't had in over 4 months. I then went back to full gluten and dairy-free, waited a month. Then introduced 1 dairy item. I choose milk first, just 1/2 cup, regular 2% organic milk. No change in bowels. I was frankly very shocked as milk is quite often the root cause of childhood constipation, but he had no change in texture or color, or frequency in bowels. So, I waited 2 weeks, and tried yogurt. Wham! Just like gluten, fully constipated, I did the same thing as I did with the gluten and used a few doses of calm after 48-hour mark. He passed hard blackish stool, the same color and consistency that I saw after he had gluten, so, no yogurt. I determined he can tolerate a small amount of milk, no more than 1/2 cup every few days. He tolerates butter daily with no issues. I suggest a grass-fed, organic if you find that your child can indeed tolerate butter. This is the best, especially if they have been on Restoralax, as this has been proven to strip the body of butyrate and butter contains this. My son's ND actually recommended the brand Kerrygold, which is what we use. It is quite expensive in Canada, but, given how many other things I no longer buy, like the snaking cakes, cold fish crackers etc., this all seems to come out to about the same in groceries, even though my butter is now 3 times what I used to pay for it. Lastly, in the food tracking exercise, I determined he can also not tolerate ice cream. I tried a few non-dairy versions, and he hated them. That's okay, he'll survive without ice cream. And that's where we are at today. Today he takes supplements to help heal the injuries I spoke about, but he doesn't need anything for constipation specifically. I still do a castor oil belly rub almost every night and an Epsom salt bath once a week or so, and he definitely rides his bike daily and does jumping exercises. I feel comfortable that we have gotten to the root cause, which is most definitely gluten, and most dairy items. We have also purchased Ion Gut Health. My husband has used it for the past 6 months and has felt amazing. Due to the nature of my son's injury, from so many years of Restoralax use, his system is so hypersensitive, it's been a very low and slow approach with him on Ion Gut Health, but we know that long term, this is the right road to be on. There are many wonderful recommendations that get rave reviews from many parents. I was faced with a situation where I just could not force anything down my son. He would just throw it up if I tried anything whatsoever that he could taste, so I had to develop a protocol that could be administered topically and/or put in water. I hope some of this is of some help to other children who we consider to be super tasters or picky eaters and have a very limited diet. The known side effects of polyethylene glycol PEG 3350, autism, neurological damage caused by prolonged use of Restoralax. My son showed no signs whatsoever of being on the spectrum until after he began to take Restoralax daily. There is a great deal of information now available that tells us that PEG 3350, the only ingredient in Restoralax, can and does cross the blood-brain barrier. There is a significant amount of information on this subject that can be searched on the internet. I am not going to go into all of it here, or this letter would be 10 times longer than it already is. There are over 25,000 documented side effects of Restoralax with the FDA today. The top ones being tics, seizures, outbursts of rage, uncontrolled anger, thoughts of self-harm, or harm to someone else, loss of concentration, agitation, stimming, delayed speech, echolalia, sensitive to noise and light, and the list goes on and on and on. If you have a child who has been given any of the following disorders: ADHD, OD, OCD, autism, Asperger's, or anything else that falls into what is now referred to as the spectrum, then you likely recognize many of these symptoms I have just listed. I know I do. My son displays many if not all of these, except self-harm, thankfully. Sadly, this is not explained to parents when we are told Miralax is as safe as water. Well, I guess that may be true, if the water is poisoned or contaminated. If I had been told that this product, which they told to give my 2-year-old, had all of these and so many more known side effects, you can bet that I would have asked for something else. None of this was discussed with me. It was something many children use and some may take for life. I guess that should have set off alarm bells when a doctor tells you that once children begin taking it, they take it for life. Huh? Then when I bought the product, here in Canada it is over the counter, so there is no prescription needed, so you see it is on you, the parent, to buy it, or not. Sneaky, and it covers the doctors, as it clearly states on the label. not intended for children under 18 years of age, and not intended for more than 7 days use. Again, that should have set off even more alarms. I admit. This did, and I called my aunt who is an nurse and asked her about it. She said, "Oh yes, we use that all the time, it's fine." So even though the package clearly states it's not intended for children, or more than 7 days use, I did what was suggested by my son's doctor and gave it to my 2-year-old, for the next 5 years. I've read that some children seem to bounce back after being on Miralax. After a few months, any of those symptoms I mentioned above, some parents say their kiddos began to change within weeks, and months later they started to see less and less of those behaviors. If you happen to have a kiddo like mine, well, the journey is likely going to be a long one. As his ND says, it took 5 years of daily dosing of Restoralax to get to where we are today. It's not unrealistic to think it will take as long, or longer to heal the damage it has done. That's a sobering thought, and not something I wanted to hear, but then I have read the worst of the worst stories from parents whose children have succumbed to their injuries due to the causes of Restoralax or have taken the lives of others due to the rage caused by this poison. So, I give thanks that I still have my son, and if it takes 5 years or 10 years, I will keep at it. I will keep trying to heal the damage that this safe as water chemical has done to my son. What happened after we stopped Restoralax? When my son had been off of Restoralax less than a week, I was on the phone with my sister. I bolted out, "He's stopped, he's stopped." She said, "What are you talking about?" I explained, through tears, my son had for the past 10 months been reciting a sequence of numbers. The numbers are every house number for about 3 blocks on the way to our house. He has been reciting this set of numbers over and over, writing them everywhere, totally consumed with them, unless I worked very hard to redirect his attention. I had just realized he stopped. I couldn't recall when I had last heard him recite them, but it was a few days for sure. I was just stunned and also overjoyed. That was the first thing that really jumped out at me. The next was really huge. My son had not been able to master pedaling a bike, despite our best effort. He'd had many tricycles, then bigger bikes, as he grew. Lots of tears, he just couldn't pedal. This is very common for kiddos on the spectrum. When he was almost 5, I bought him a balance bike. Wow, he loved that. He zoomed around on that and was so happy. When he outgrew it, we went to a bike store and had him fitted for a bike to fit his size. We kept the training wheels on and hoped we might be able to master that pedaling. He was 6. Here in Canada we still had snow in May, so we kept the bike in the house. Our house is sort of a big open concept, so he was allowed to ride his new bike inside. My husband and I took turns encouraging the pedaling. Many aching backs later, he just would cry, become so distraught he just left it parked at the front door. I finally told my husband, "Take the pedals and training wheels off, we will make it into a balance bike." He agreed. As things go, this didn't happen right away and the shiny new orange bike remained at the front door. My son had given up even trying. 2 weeks after he had been off Restoralax, I was in the kitchen doing dishes. I heard, ring ring, and there he came, smiling from ear to ear, pedaling his little heart out, like he'd been doing it his whole life. Yup, this mama cried. This was unbelievable to witness, and there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that as we continue to be further away from his last dose of Restoralax, combined with some good quality probiotics, things were changing rapidly with my son. Next up was coloring. This happened just a day or 2 after the bike experience. My son came to me with one of his workbooks. I homeschool and we have workbooks all around the house. There are several activities that he just could not do. They were very distressing and I just moved past them in every workbook, thinking one day we would circle back to those exercises. One of those activities was coloring inside the lines, and coloring using a color code. One night I was sitting on the floor, watching a video on my iPad. He comes over, sits down beside me, brings a workbook and crayons, and completes a coloring project that required using the color code beside the picture. Not only had he followed the code to a T, he was perfectly inside the lines. I actually thought maybe his dad had helped, but nope, he did it, totally on his own. Then I went searching for workbooks that we'd been all the way through, but I'd skipped the parts one mentioned. Sure enough, book after book, he'd gone through them and completed every single one of those tasks. Word finds fill in the blanks, draw a line from one row of items that match to items in another row, word puzzles, mazes, he really hated those, would cry when we came to them. He had found every single page and completed every single exercise, on his own. Yes, more tears. We had an occupational therapist and a speech therapist that came to the house for private one-on-one weekly sessions. In the second week after stopping Restoralax, both therapists asked me after his session, "What are you doing differently?" He's like a different child? Prior, he ran from the therapy room, multiple times in the hour. It was a constant task of trying to get him to focus long enough to complete a short activity, maybe 4 minutes long. There was usually outburst of throwing toys, his water thermos, etc. Each therapist said, on 2 separate days, he just sat, listened internally, spoke with them much better and clearer vocabulary and did not try to escape the room once. I responded, well, I stopped poisoning him, that definitely gets one's attention. I explained briefly what I had learned about Restoralax, and he'd been off of it now 2 weeks, and he'd been taking probiotics, and some magnesium citrate to help with bowel movements. They were both dumbfounded. As trained therapists in their fields, there was no denying the huge difference in my son's behavior. That was over a year ago. I'm happy to report that as my son's speech and behavior continued to improve at exponential speed, we were able to reduce, and finally, stop therapy altogether. This was truly amazing. Of course, my number one concern has been, and will always be, to get any help for my son that he needs to help him reach his full potential. After 3 years of steady therapy, my husband and I had accumulated a debt of over 60,000 Canadian, which we now are working on paying off, and we are happy to reroute therapy funds into some of his new loves, which are a new set of drums, piano, and in the fall we plan on starting horseback lessons. Our story is not unique, sadly. I've talked to hundreds of parents, read thousands of stories on various internet sites, all with the same or similar stories. They all have one common denominator: peg 3,350 laxatives. We are not making these stories up. We are not imagining the differences we see in our children when we stop giving our children Restoralax. Today, we continue on our healing journey. We are not even at the midway point, but we are 1 year into a new life of no Restoralax and a new outlook on Big Pharma, and how they influence our medical practitioners. I continue to learn and read every day. I continue to pray that my son will be one of the children who can have a full recovery from the devastating effects Restoralax caused, and I will continue to tell our story to anyone who will listen. Every day our children are being harmed by those who love them the very most, their own parents, and we have absolutely no idea we are doing it. So, I will end this letter with how I began it. We can only do better, when we know better. Now I know better, and I will continue to do better for my son for as long as it takes. Any laxative you use is a short-term solution and just a band-aid on the problem of constipation. For a long-term solution, you need to work on finding a natural protocol that will help you, or your child, go 1 to 3 times a day. Then work on figuring out why you or your child is constipated. I have a course that will guide you through this process step by step. Go to naturalconstipationsolutions.com/resources for information on the course and for a free workbook. I have a constipation relief workbook for adults and help your child become a super duper pooper workbook for children who struggle with constipation or withholding. I will put the link in the description box below this video.